So I thought today we could talk about a very interesting concept that you may or may not know about, which is the famous hero's journey, and how you can think of your own life as a hero's journey. There are many authors, in particular Joseph Campbell, who is now dead, but who was hugely influenced by Carl Jung. And he wrote a very, very well-known book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. But that book is a book of mythology. So before you rush out and buy it, it may not be your cup of tea. It's a rather dense academic kind of book. But because of his work in the field of mythology and with the concept of the hero, for example, he met George Lucas, you know, the guy that did all the Star Wars movies. And it was because of their interaction and George Lucas's interest in Joseph Campbell's work on the hero and the way the hero is represented in most of our lives in some fashion, even if it's just to reject the hero or the way you could live a hero's life in your own trajectory. So it was because of George Lucas's great interest in this part of Campbell's work that he then came up with the Star Wars movies. And the concept, you know, of Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker and all these different people who are symbols of different parts of the mythic story of the hero. And so Campbell wrote something that I always have enjoyed looking at, but you know, many other people have written a similar thing. And he says, opportunities to find deeper powers within ourselves come when life seems most challenging. And of course, we know that. That is when we are set up against like a curb, a hindrance, something that we either figure out how to step up on and overcome, or we don't. And in that process, he would say that we are in a part of our own hero's journey. And when I initially wrote about this, I posed some very ordinary questions that we kind of can see in our own lives or the lives of the people we are friends with. What did you do that day in the schoolyard when you were only 10 and you saw Susie getting bullied by two older girls? So assuming you did something that was heroic, that wasn't yet the hero's journey, but it was you showing up the hero in yourself. What did you do that day when your car broke down in the middle of nowhere with no reception for your mobile phone? You figured out a solution of some kind. What did you do when you found it appeared that your baby had drowned in the pool, but you refused to accept it and fought for his life? What did you do when you lost your job due to downsizing, couldn't find another one in your field, but you had to pay the bills? The solution to things like that are parts of a hero's journey. What did you do when you realized your profession wasn't fulfilling you, but because of your obligations to family and home, you were not able to simply strike out for something else? Didn't you stay there at that job, bide your time, and give of yourself for the sake of those who depended on you? Again, that is a part of the hero's journey. And what did you do during the 9 months that your father was dying of terminal lung cancer to help him ease the discomfort? So those are just a few little tiny examples of where you can begin to see the heroic part of your own journey in that sense. And of course, it's not just challenges of this nature, but it's also looking for meaning in your life. That is part of a hero's journey. And you know, when you try to move in the direction of that which you believe gives meaning to your life, even if, say, you are working in something that isn't fulfilling you, but perhaps the piano or the guitar or singing is something that you want to bring more strongly into your life. And so you go and take piano lessons or guitar lessons, or you join a singing group, etc., etc. And that becomes a quest of some kind where you are attempting to not only enrich your life and feel better about your life, but you're going down this hero's journey of fulfilling whatever it is that you are capable of doing. And so, of course, as you go through these kinds of steps and begin to see how your own life could be considered heroic, it's very interesting to look at the different steps that Campbell talks about, even though he doesn't quite, explain it in a cookie cutter sense, how we can then apply this to our own 2020 lives. But he wrote another one of his quotations that I love, which you've probably seen on Facebook because everybody uses it. It is by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure. And the stumbling part, of course, is the part where we are unhappy and we are worried or afraid or confused or don't know what to do. And yet we have to figure out a solution. So Campbell, when he talks about the hero's journey, he is using the different heroic myths in history, mythology, fairy tales, and so on. A typical myth is, for example, a king who needs to, find the dragon because the dragon has the princess, and without the princess, for some reason, the kingdom cannot be saved. And it's either the third son of the king or a lowly pauper person, and the third son is always the one nobody thinks anything of, who decides to go and slay this dragon or find this princess or find the magic potion that will save the king's life and thereby save the kingdom. And of course, this hero, as he goes in search of the dragon or the magic potion or the whatever it is he's going to do, is the Grail myth is a very famous one, right? Parsifal. Anyway, as the hero, who is not yet a hero, but he is moving in that direction as he goes out into a very unknown place. Many authors, I think T.S. Eliot referred to it as the dark forest, and you have to, or the wilderness, or the desert. And these are all symbols, of course, for the bits of our lives where we have to go through something that we are very unfamiliar with. And by the way, the magic potion to save the king's life or slaying of the dragon and so on, that is our initial challenge. The thing that has come up in our life that we are challenged to solve. And of course, if you then go ahead and take on the challenge and move in the direction of finding the magic potion or the slaying of the dragon and so on and rescuing the princess, you will go into places you have never been. And of course, it's a whole lot more comfortable to sit back and to not do all of that. Let's say you have a comfortable job. And let's say, like in that example I gave earlier, you're not really happy with it. It doesn't really fulfill you. And you would prefer to do da-da-da. So there's your challenge. Now, to go and do whatever that thing is that you would prefer to do to your job might mean years of practicing something or studying something, preparing something in a world with which you are not familiar. And in that process, as you go through this dark forest of unknown dimensions, Campbell says you begin to find helpers. Of course, in the myths, the helpers might be a fairy, a wonderful fairy who gives you a cloak that makes you invisible, so you can, escape from bad elements that are in this forest. Or it might be, as in some, there's a myth of little ants that come and help. I don't know if it's Perseus, and help him separate the grains that he has been tasked with separating if he wants to get back to his love by some, goddess. And so these ants come in to help him and do this monumental task because he has to do it overnight. And there are millions and millions of grains that have to be separated into separate groups or something like that. And so in our real lives, the helpers might be a mentor that comes out of nowhere and is in your life suddenly. I've had a number of mentors in my life, especially in my younger years, that popped out of the woodwork. It's not like I was looking for them. If I had known about them, I would have looked for them because they were wonderful to get to know, and all the richness of things that I learned from them. But they pop out of nowhere, and maybe in your life for a relatively short period of time, to give you that cloak of invisibility or a helmet that makes you safe against who knows what, etc., etc. So that process of finding, and the helpers might be a book. I'm sure you've heard of people that go to a bookstore and boom, a book almost pops out of the bookshelf and falls on the floor, or it is the one that is sticking out so much further than the others that you notice it and you pull it out, and that book happens to have some answers in it for you. Or you hear something, you listen to a program, you are part of a conversation that steers you in a new direction with regards to understanding how you can get through this dark forest. And then, of course, you have a number of battles to surmount. And those battles might be, in my earlier example, where you are in a profession that doesn't make you happy, and you are slowly moving in the new direction. The battles you have to surmount might be finding money to finance this, might be figuring out where you can find the time to do whatever it is you have to do in order to get into that direction. And of course, in the myths, the battles are always something where then the little helper things come in handy, the invisible cloak, the helmet, the helper ants, and of course there are a magic wand, a potion of some kind. And they're wonderful to read if you're into that kind of thing. And by the way, Joseph Campbell and a man called Bill Moyers, M-O-Y-E-R-S, were, Moyers is a journalist in America, he's still alive. They I think they got together through George Lucas. At any rate, Moyers and Campbell put out a 6-hour program via the public broadcasting system, which now is easily available. I mean, this was way back in the 80s, and unfortunately the video quality isn't wonderful. But the 6-hour program was subdivided into 1-hour sections where Campbell speaks in ways that are magnificent, not only about the hero's journey, but about so many other symbols that you find in mythology. And Campbell was an incredible source of information because he spent his whole life with this subject and thinking about this. And like I say, it was very influenced by Jung. And I used to use this 6-hour program when I was teaching comparative mythology in university. It was always an elective. These subjects, these fascinating subjects, are never some of the subjects that you have to take. But it was an elective, and in different classes, I would show one of the hours and then the second and so on until we did the 6 hours of this video, because it was so incredible. You know, the students would typically come out of there telling me they couldn't believe what they had heard, because Campbell, A, was such a fascinating man, and B, once you see the rich symbolism that is there in these myths and how you can apply it to your own life, your life just becomes so much richer. Anyway, so I was saying that then you go through a number of challenges after you've gone through the forest and you got your helpers or whatever, your magic things, and now you face a great number of challenges probably before you eventually get to what Campbell calls the boon. And the boon in mythology or fairy tales would be, you know, that the prince or the little pauper person has found the magic elixir, the potion that will cure the king's sickness and therefore save the kingdom, or he has slain the dragon and he now has the princess. Slaying of the dragon was obviously the biggest challenge of all the challenges, getting the potion away perhaps from an ogre or a man-eating beast of some kind. And he now is tasked with bringing this back into the world. So in the fairy tale, you know, all he's got to do is take the potion and give it to the king, travel back to the kingdom, or take the princess back to the kingdom, and so on and so forth. And then typically, by the way, the pauper or the prince or the whatever gets, you know, gets to marry the princess or becomes the king himself, and so on. But in real life, the way Campbell then takes us through this next step. So you have your boon. Let's say your boon is that you now have the possibility of your new profession, the one that you had been looking towards and desiring and working towards all this time. And you now bring it out into the world in a way that is fulfilling to you. I'm going to use Campbell's own life to show you a little bit what happened. So Campbell, one of the things he did, he went away for something like 3 years when he was still a relatively young man, and he lived in a little, you know, cottage or country, a little country cabin that somebody lent him in I don't know, in New Hampshire or something like that, Connecticut. And spent 3 years reading and digesting mythology, world mythology. And when he came out, of course, I would assume that part of his desire would have been to present to the world this wonderful knowledge that he had acquired and understanding about the symbolism in myths regarding our own lives. But, you know, nobody knew of him. He was just this guy that had studied for a long time. And I believe he then decided to work as a university professor at Sarah Bernard, which is an American university for women. And this was way back in, I don't know what years this was, 40s or something like that. And, or maybe a little later. At any rate, you know, teaching mythology in an academic fashion to a bunch of youngish students was probably not the way he would have desired to bring his new knowledge, his boon, out into the world. But that was what was available. I don't mean to say that he couldn't have had a different job. He might have been able at that point, perhaps somebody might have hired him for a prestigious newspaper to become a writer of some kind in order to write along the lines that the newspaper would have wanted him to write along. But you see, when you have this thing that you have worked so hard for and that you went through all these challenges for in order to then bring it out into the world, you have several choices. And one of those choices is to allow the world to kind of twist it around so that you make it palatable, you make it easy to digest for the world in a way that they want or it wants, as opposed to what you believe you have there. And of course, that means that life becomes quite easy again. But you're not really doing the thing that you had been working for. There's another choice where you say, well, you know, screw that. Nobody really understands what I'm trying to do here. And, you know, I can just go back and live in that cabin and read more for years and years because that's much more interesting. And I can probably earn enough money to eat by washing cars in the local village or whatever. Or you do what he did. So he took on this position as a university professor, teaching in a very humble way, you know, to these students. And in the meantime, preparing and gathering further information. And when he wrote that first, well, I don't know if the book was the first book, but it was the book that kind of put him on the map, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. A lot of people started, you know, looking at this human being. He didn't become rich or anything like it, because that is not a book that is going to sell like, you know, a best-selling novel. But a number of people took note. And so bit by bit, Campbell was able to get his real message out, which is this whole world of symbolism and so much deeper meaning that is found in the world of mythology. And anyway, so the hero's journey, which then, as I mentioned earlier, with regards to George Lucas and Skywalker Ranch and all those Star Wars movies that Campbell was so instrumental in bringing about because of his ideas, that was not necessarily the culmination of Campbell's work, because Campbell went on to do many, many other things. But his way of bringing the boon back to the world was humble. He had to accept that this was a process he had to go through in order to see what could happen. He mentions, let me see if I can just find this. He mentions something about when you come back. When you come back, he talks about sometimes people have to, he actually uses the example of teaching. I thought I had underlined it, but I can't find it now. He mentions that maybe you want to really bring something to the world like he did that you cannot yet. And let's say you are an artist. So perhaps you teach painting in little weekend classes to people, and you kind of are able to make a living that way. And then you have the rest of the time free to continue with your art, which eventually is that boon that you are bringing out into the world in a way that you wouldn't be able to when you first finish your challenge, where you went out to find the magic potion and, you know, rescue the princess from the dragon and so on and so forth. But I want to make, before we run out of time, I want to make a little bit more emphasis on some of the things that a lot of us do that can begin to pinpoint to you your own process of the heroic journey. Because you're probably saying to yourself, yeah, but how do I understand that in my own humble little life? And of course, that makes a lot of sense. Most of us are living humble little lives. And unless you look at aspects of your life where you have already done heroic things, you may not understand where this whole thing is coming from. So another question might be, so like some of those that I asked earlier on in today's talk, do you sit in a wheelchair all day dealing with a life from that vantage point instead of being able to stand on your feet? That too is being a hero. I mean, obviously, Superman, Christopher Reeve comes to mind, and all the heroic things he did. way after he had been Superman, right? But he did heroic things from that wheelchair. And so that is another way of looking at it. Do you spend the days of your retirement helping young teens at the neighborhood high school excel in math? This too is being a hero. I remember reading an article about some big physics professor who said what he really always wanted to do, rather than be that well-paid, tenured physics professor with books and I don't know what, was to show young students the richness of mathematics. Do you volunteer at a local shelter or soup kitchen? That too is being a hero. Do you brush away your tiredness after a long day at work in order to come back home and offer your children a smile while you fix them dinner and help them with their homework? That too is being a hero. It may not yet be where you get the boon, you understand, but you have to first figure out what you've already done that is very heroic in your own life. Do you live a life of grim financial or physical hardship? And you get up each morning and set out on your day, determined to live positively, determined to look for yet another way out of your predicament, and determined to not allow it to get you down. That too is being a hero. Have you become aware of parts of your personality that do not serve you well? We talk about this a lot here. Are you perhaps critical, judgmental, impatient, unkind, or arrogant? Making the effort to overcome these ways of thinking and behaving is also being a hero. And finally, do you have a dream, any dream, and do you make a conscious effort each and every day to make your dream a reality? This too is being a hero. So the overcoming of stumbling blocks and the recognition that there is something out there for you. And I'm not talking about being an influencer or making a truckload of money or becoming well known or any of those things. I am talking about that which is what your dream is, what you want for yourself. And it may be a very quiet thing that only very few people in your life will ever find out about. But that is what you need to think about when we're talking about the hero. So these ideas of moving forward through the challenges of your life in order to get closer to that dream of yours is really the intent, I think, of what he wanted to say and what I wanted to convey to you today. Because don't you think it's very exciting to think of your own life as a heroic journey, as opposed to a life that is plodding, where you plod Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday you have some fun, and then you plod again. No, that's not what life is meant to be. And I think Joseph Campbell's way of talking about this is wonderful. And by the way, there is a magnificent Joseph Campbell book, not a book he wrote. It is a book that somebody put together, edited it, of many of the things he said over time about life and symbolism, as opposed to about myths per se. And that book, unfortunately, I didn't write the title down, and I'm not going to walk over to my library to find it, but if you're interested in it, I think it's called A Joseph Campbell Companion by Diane somebody. But I'm, if you WhatsApp me later or send me an email, I'm happy to give you the name of it. Okay, so we have a little bit of time left.